autumn sky burned with shades of crimson and gold as Alina led her group of friends deeper into the sprawling forest. It was supposed to be a weekend escape, just 5 friends reconnecting with nature. The plan had seemed foolproof, a scenic 2-day hike followed by a cozy night at a remote cabin. But now, with the sun sinking behind the treetops, unease began to creep into the group. Tom checked his watch for the 3rd time in an hour. We've got about 2 hours of daylight left. If we don't keep moving, we'll be hiking in the dark. Maybe we should pick up the pace, Mia suggested, nervously brushing her hair behind her ear. She was always the cautious one, the voice of reason in their adventures. Alina, who had planned the trip, frowned. I've got a better idea. She gestured toward a faint, overgrown path branching off the main trail. This shortcut will cut our hike in half. We'll get to the cabin before nightfall. Tom squinted at the narrow path. Where'd you hear about this? It's not on the map. A forum online, Alina said confidently. Experienced hikers swear by it. Mia hesitated, glancing at the others. It looks wrong, like no one's been down there in years. Trust me, Alina insisted, her tone sharp. I wouldn't suggest it if I wasn't sure. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but Alina's confidence won them over. One by one, they stepped off the beaten trail and onto the shortcut. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The forest along the main trail had been lively, filled with birdsong and the rustle of animals in the underbrush. But here the air was still, heavy with an unnatural quiet. Even their footsteps seemed muted, swallowed by the moss-covered ground. Mark, the youngest of the group, broke the silence. Weird, isn't it? Like the forest is listening. Don't be ridiculous, Alina snapped, though her own voice wavered. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, determined to prove she'd made the right call. But as the minutes turned to hours, unease settled over the group like a shroud. The shortcut didn't seem to lead anywhere. Instead, it twisted and turned, looping back on itself in a confusing labyrinth. The trees grew denser, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. I don't like this, Mia whispered. We should go back. And waste all the time we've already spent? Alina shot back. We're probably halfway there. No, Tom said, his voice firm. We're lost, admitted Alina. Before she could respond, Mia let out a strangled cry. Look, she whispered, pointing to a tree. Carved into the bark was a symbol, a single, unblinking eye surrounded by jagged lines. It hadn't been there moments ago. Who did that? Mark asked, his voice trembling. No one answered. The forest around them seemed darker now, the trees casting long, menacing shadows. And then they heard it. At first, it was barely audible, like the faint rustling of leaves. But as they strained to listen, it grew louder, more distinct. A murmur of voices speaking in a language none of them understood. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around them like a sinister veil. Did you hear that? Mia asked, her eyes wide. It's just the wind, Alina said, though her own pulse was racing. It's not the wind, Tom muttered. It's something else. As the whispers grew louder, the group quickened their pace, their fear mounting with every step. But the forest seemed to shift around them, the path narrowing and twisting as if it were alive. When the first scream echoed through the trees, it was Tom's. Tom had tripped over a root, and before he could get back up, the ground beneath him shifted. Thick black roots coiled around his legs, dragging him downward. The others rushed to help, but the earth seemed to devour him, swallowing him whole. His screams cut off abruptly, leaving only the whispers. Panic set in. Run! Mark shouted, grabbing Mia's arm. The group sprinted down the trail, their breath ragged, their hearts pounding. But no matter how far they ran, the whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them, the trees closing in, the ground turning soft and treacherous. Mia was the next to go. She stopped abruptly, her eyes wide with terror, as she stared into the shadows. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "It's calling my name." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped off the trail and vanished into the darkness. Her screams echoed long after she was gone. Now it was just Alina and Mark, stumbling through the oppressive darkness. The whispers were deafening now, an unbearable cacophony of voices that seemed to speak directly into their minds. "We have to keep moving," Alina gasped, though she no longer believed they would make it out. Mark grabbed her arm, his face pale and desperate. "This is your fault. You brought us here." Before she could respond, he froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Behind you," he whispered. Alina turned slowly. A figure stood in the shadows, its form barely distinguishable from the trees. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long, its face hidden beneath a tangle of black vines. And at the center of its chest was the same symbol carved into the trees, a single, unblinking eye. Mark screamed and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Alina didn't follow. She couldn't. The figure stepped closer, and the whispers rose to a crescendo, drowning out her thoughts. When Alina woke, the sun was rising, casting the forest in an eerie golden light. She was alone, the whispers gone, the symbol no longer visible on the trees. But something had changed. She found her way back to the main trail, her legs weak, her mind numb. Days later, when the search party found her, she could barely speak. She only muttered one thing over and over: "The forest knows." The search party found no trace of her friends. The shortcut had vanished entirely, leaving behind no evidence it had ever existed. Locals whispered about the cursed woods, warning hikers to stay on the marked paths. But Alina knew the truth. The forest wasn't cursed. It was alive. Moral: some shortcuts lead not to destinations, but to nightmares. Some paths should never be taken, no matter how tempting they seem. The end.